The antique shop was dimly lit, filled with the scent of aging wood and forgotten things. The air was thick with the history of countless objects, each with its own story, its own past. The atmosphere was almost tangible, a mix of nostalgia and mystery that seemed to cling to every surface. Dust motes danced in the weak rays of sunlight that pierced through the grimy windows. The light struggled to penetrate the gloom, casting long shadows that seemed to move and shift with a life of their own. It was as if the very air was alive, whispering secrets of the past. My eyes fell upon it, a porcelain doll nestled amongst tarnished silver and yellowed lace. It stood out not just because of its delicate features, but because of the aura it seemed to exude. There was something almost magnetic about it, drawing my gaze and holding it captive. Its eyes, two pools of endless black, seemed to hold a depth of sorrow that sent a chill down my spine. They were not just painted on, they seemed to be windows to another world, a world filled with pain and suffering. The longer I looked, the more I felt a connection, a pull towards the darkness within. I felt an unsettling presence, a cold whisper against my ear. It was as if the doll was trying to communicate, to share its story with me. The air around me grew colder, and I could almost hear faint whispers, words that I couldn't quite make out but felt deep in my bones. There was a story etched into the doll's pale face, a tale whispered on the edges of darkness. The intricate details of its features seemed to tell a story of their own, a narrative of sorrow and despair that was almost palpable. It was as if the doll had witnessed countless tragedies and was now a silent testament to them. It was a story of sorrow, of despair, and of a curse that clung to it like a shroud. The doll's expression, so lifelike yet so sorrowful, seemed to convey a deep, unending sadness. It was as if it carried the weight of the world on its tiny shoulders, a burden that it could never escape. I was drawn to it, compelled by an unseen force to uncover its secrets. My hand moved almost of its own accord, reaching out towards the doll. There was a sense of inevitability, as if this moment had been predestined, as if I was meant to find this doll and learn its story. Little did I know this innocent-looking doll was a vessel of something ancient and evil. Its seemingly innocent appearance belied the darkness that lay within. There was a malevolence, a sinister presence that lurked just beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. My pulse quickened as I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cold porcelain. The touch sent a jolt through me, a shock that seemed to resonate deep within my soul. The doll was cold, unnaturally so, and the sensation was both thrilling and terrifying. The air grew heavy, the shadows in the room seeming to twist and writhe. It was as if the very fabric of reality was shifting, bending to the will of the darkness that the doll harbored. The shadows took on shapes, forms that were almost recognizable but always just out of reach. I could feel it now, a palpable sense of dread, a warning whispered on the wind. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a sense of impending doom that seemed to press down on me from all sides. It was as if the very air was alive with the promise of something terrible. This was no ordinary doll. This was a conduit to something dark and terrifying. It was a gateway, a portal to a world of nightmares and shadows. The doll was a vessel, a container for an ancient evil that had been waiting, biding its time, and now it had found me. The doll's origins were shrouded in tragedy, a tale that has been whispered through generations. Crafted in the 1800s by a renowned toy maker named Emile, it was meant to be a gift for his beloved daughter, Anya. Emile was known far and wide for his unparalleled craftsmanship. Each doll he created was a masterpiece, a labor of love. Emile poured his heart and soul into the doll, meticulously painting its delicate features and crafting its elaborate lace dress. Every brushstroke, every stitch was a testament to his devotion and the deep bond he shared with his daughter. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel twist in store. The skies darkened, and an ominous feeling settled over Emile's home. Anya was struck down by a sudden illness, her laughter silenced forever. The once vibrant home was now filled with an unbearable silence, a void that could never be filled. Grief-stricken, Emile dressed his daughter's lifeless body in the doll's intended dress, laying her to rest with the porcelain figure by her side. It was his final act of love, a gesture that spoke of his unending sorrow. He whispered a wish into the doll's silken hair, a desperate plea for his daughter to live again. His words were filled with a longing that transcended the boundaries of life and death, but his wish was twisted, his grief warping the fabric of reality. The air grew thick with an unnatural presence, as if the very essence of his sorrow had taken form. The doll, once a symbol of love, became a vessel for Emil's sorrow. Its once joyful expression now mirrored the depths of his despair, a haunting reminder of what he had lost. His grief, potent and raw, seeped into the porcelain, imbuing it with a life of its own, a dark, malevolent life. The doll's presence grew more sinister with each passing day, as if it were feeding off Emil's anguish. The doll's eyes, once sparkling with painted joy, turned a bottomless black, reflecting the abyss of Emil's despair. They seemed to follow him, a constant reminder of his tragic wish and the price he had paid for it. The once cherished creation had become a haunting spectre, a dark legacy of the toy maker's sorrow. Years passed, and the doll vanished from Anya's grave, resurfacing in antique shops and dusty attics, leaving a trail of misfortune in its wake. It seemed to have a life of its own, moving from place to place, always finding a new owner to haunt. The doll's journey was shrouded in mystery, and those who encountered it were left with more questions than answers. Each new owner, initially charmed by its delicate beauty, soon became aware of the chilling aura that clung to it. The doll's porcelain face, with its lifelike features, seemed to hide a sinister secret. As days turned into weeks, the new owners would start to feel an inexplicable sense of dread, as if the doll was watching their every move. Unexplained events plagued their lives, whispers in the dead of night, objects moving on their own, and a constant feeling of being watched. The whispers were faint, almost imperceptible, but they carried a malevolent intent that sent shivers down the spine. The owners would often wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced that someone or something was in the room with them. There was a pattern to the tragedies that befell the doll's owners. Each incident, though seemingly random, had a common thread: the presence of the doll. It was as if the doll was a harbinger of doom, bringing misfortune to anyone who dared to possess it. The owners would try to rid themselves of the doll, but it always found its way back, as if it was bound to them by an invisible force. Accidents, illnesses, and untimely deaths seemed to follow it like a curse. Families were torn apart, friendships shattered, and lives ruined, all because of the doll. The owners would often fall ill with mysterious ailments that baffled doctors, and no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't escape the doll's malevolent influence. Some whispered of nightmares, vivid and terrifying, featuring the doll's cold black eyes boring into their souls. These dreams were so real, so intense, that the owners would wake up screaming, unable to shake the feeling of dread that lingered long after they had woken up. The doll's eyes seemed to follow them, even in their dreams, a constant reminder of the darkness that surrounded it. The doll, it seemed, was not content to merely exist. It craved attention, feeding off the fear and despair of those around it. The more fear it generated, the stronger it seemed to become, as if it was drawing power from the very emotions it evoked. The owners would often find themselves inexplicably drawn to the doll, unable to resist its sinister allure. It craved attention, feeding off the fear and despair of those around it. The doll seemed to thrive on the chaos it created, reveling in the misery of its owners. It was as if the doll had a mind of its own, a malevolent intelligence that delighted in tormenting those who crossed its path. One owner, a young artist named Sophie, claimed the doll whispered to her in the quiet hours, its voice a chilling rasp that promised darkness and despair. Sophie, who had always been a skeptic, found herself questioning her sanity as the doll's whispers grew louder and more insistent. She tried to ignore it, but the doll's voice was relentless, filling her mind with dark thoughts and terrifying visions. Driven to the brink of madness, Sophie tried to destroy the doll, hurling it against the wall, but it remained intact, its porcelain face mocking her terror. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't break the doll, and its unyielding presence only served to deepen her despair. Sophie realized that the doll was indestructible, a malevolent force that couldn't be defeated by mere physical means. The doll, it was becoming clear, was indestructible, its curse as unbreakable as the bonds of death. It seemed to be a conduit for some dark, otherworldly power, a force that defied explanation. The doll's curse was a mystery that no one could unravel, a shadow that loomed over all who encountered it, leaving a trail of fear and despair in its wake. The doll's presence was always heralded by a series of unsettling events. A sudden drop in temperature, the distinct scent of lavender and decay, and the feeling of unseen eyes watching from the shadows. Then the whispers would begin, soft at first, like the rustling of silk against silk. They seemed to emanate from the doll itself, growing louder, more insistent. The whispers spoke of sorrow, of loss, and of a longing that could never be fulfilled. Some claimed to hear their own names being called, their darkest fears articulated in a language that chilled them to the bone. Animals, particularly sensitive to the supernatural, would react with terror to the doll's presence. Dogs would bark uncontrollably, their fur standing on end, while cats would hiss and flee, their eyes wide with primal fear. It was as if they could sense the darkness that clung to the doll, the malevolent entity trapped within its porcelain shell. Word of the cursed doll reached the ears of Professor Eldridge, a renowned collector of occult artifacts. Driven by a thirst for knowledge and a morbid curiosity, he sought out the doll, believing it to be a key to unlocking ancient secrets. He acquired the doll from its previous owner, a reclusive antiquarian who seemed relieved to be rid of it. The professor, a man of logic and reason, scoffed at the stories surrounding the doll. He saw it as a fascinating artifact, a relic of a bygone era. He displayed it prominently in his study, surrounded by his prized collection of occult books and objects. But the doll's curse was patient, waiting for the opportune moment to reveal itself. One stormy night, as the professor pored over ancient texts, searching for clues to the doll's origins, he felt a cold breath on his neck. Turning slowly, he came face to face with the doll, its black eyes burning with an eerie light. The whispers began, louder than ever before, swirling around him like a vortex of despair. As the storm raged outside, the professor heard a faint melody drifting from the doll. It was a lullaby, hauntingly beautiful and filled with an unbearable sadness. The tune seemed to weave its way into his mind, worming its way into his subconscious. He tried to resist, to break free from the hypnotic melody, but it was no use. The doll's song had ensnared him, drawing him deeper into its web of darkness. The professor felt his sanity slipping, his grip on reality loosening with each passing note. Driven to the brink, the professor attempted to destroy the doll, smashing it against the fireplace mantel. But the porcelain remained intact, the haunting melody continuing without missing a beat. The doll, it seemed, was invincible, its curse as powerful as ever.